Good afternoon, everyone, and this is the final session. I have to say it's very hard to follow that last session because it was so informative and in a way, not overwhelming, but like the seriousness of what was being discussed was really so, as indeed throughout the conference, but you know, when you talk about the harm to victims and you see the range and the seriousness of the violence and perversion and everything that, you know, young people are being exposed to. It's really, you know, you kind of just, it stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? Even if you're very, very familiar with the issues and you just really feel, my God, you know, it has come to this. And I suppose it reminded me that, you know, because I've been around for a long time, that I was a social worker in the 70s and 80s when child sexual abuse was really, the curtain was being pulled back on it, and it was very difficult then. It was very difficult to get disclosures. It was very difficult to see children individually. It was really very uphill for child sexual abuse to be recognized for what it was. Quite hard to interview children individually and so on. And then we had the specialist units developing, and with greater and greater awareness in society, and then we had more and more legislation. And, you know, as I reflect on that period, and I remember working in the Child and Family Centre in Ballymun, and we were running I wasn't involved directly, but one of my colleagues was doing a course with young adolescent offenders, which of course featured a lot in the last discussion about working with young offenders. And, you know, often is seen as a lot of potential there to interrupt the patterns. And now, you know, you look at where child sexual abuse is now online and what we've been hearing here today. And of course, you know, the offline hasn't, you know, at all gone away, and we still have to reach out to individuals and families in all sorts of ways. So it's a very serious conversation, and well done. I think it needed the refocus that this conference is bringing to it, and that the Monitor is bringing, and well done to the Children's Rights Alliance, to everybody involved, for bringing this focus kind of back again into this area, because there are so many competing demands on politics, on politicians, on NGOs, on all of you, that I think this focus is really great to get it back and to begin to think about what we need to do. Just a few political points to make I've sort of been getting up to date on what's happening in relation to the directive and CSAM. And there's kind of good and there's bad news. The bad news is that Poland, just yesterday, who have the presidency in the EU, went to the Council and came up with a recommendation that it should not be mandatory to disclose from the tech companies, etc., and also said that anything to do with privacy and encryption should not be undermined in any way. There's quite a long technical phrase about that. That was yesterday, with the Council, with Poland making these recommendations. So well worth keeping an eye on where Poland is going as the presidency of the EU to see what they will finally recommend and where that legislation, that directive might land. So that's problematic, because I was in the Parliament when everybody reacted, I would say kind of crazily almost, in relation to the worry about privacy concerns. And they just, you know, overwhelmed everything else and it didn't progress. Second thing is that the Women's Rights Committee just last week published a very good opinion with a lot of amendments on what the Commission had proposed in relation to the directive, and that's really, that's very good. I was just sharing that with Nolene earlier and looking at some of the amendments, and it's really good. So that's a useful piece of work to have had done. The third thing is that the directive on violence against women, which I was involved in, I was rapporteur with Evan Inser, who was a Swedish socialist colleague, that applies to children. So I think there's a lot of potential in that and well worth examining, because all of the protections for victims that the government are going to have to implement by 2027, they do apply to children as well. And I think there's potential there. And given that we're getting into a solutions-based mode here, I think those number of points are worth thinking about from the, if you like, the more macro political point of view. So this session is about solutions. It's about solutions to a safer digital future. So where are the solutions? What are the solutions? how do we want to walk out of here today thinking about what we can all do to help bring those solutions forward on the basis of what we've heard already today and the work all of you have been doing to date. So that's the goal that we have here with my panel. So if I can just tell you who my panel are: Jane McGarrigle, the National Co-ordinator of Webwise Ireland. And Jane oversees the development and delivery of Webwise, the Irish Internet Safety Awareness Centre. And she's led the development of a range of award-winning internet safety programs for children, parents, teachers, and schools. And she also has responsibility for the coordination and promotion of Safer Internet Day in Ireland. And I'll let her tell you the rest of what she does herself. Áine, CEO of the National Parents Council. Áine started her career as a trainee accountant, but then changed direction and qualified as a general and paediatric nurse. And then she went back to full-time education. And then she did a lot of work with the ISPCC. And she was appointed CEO of the National Parents Council in, I think it was 2007? Right. So a lot of it's like what happens to me. A lot of experience, very experienced, and that's very important. Okay, and then we have Detective Sergeant Cathy Curtin, online child exploitation unit from the Garda National Protective Services Bureau. And we all know about that and how important it is in terms of child investigation, child protection, domestic abuse intervention and investigation, human trafficking investigation, specialist interviewing, and so on. I think it's really important that we have these specialist units in An Garda Síochána. So we also have Julie, who's the Director of Legal Policy and Services from the Children's Rights Alliance. And you joined the Children's Rights Alliance, Julie, in 2013. And when I asked her what she was going to speak about in this session, she said hope. So I said, that's really good, because we do want to leave here, you know, with hope and not be overwhelmed by the seriousness of the issues that we're dealing with and the complexity. And I suppose that's one of the things we'll discuss in this session. So that's your panel, and we'll start off by a discussion about the work that each member of the panel is doing and your perception after the discussions today and from your own experience of the solutions and how we should be thinking about them. So I'm going to start in a very general way with that question. Jane, I might start with you.
Yeah, sure. So Webwise are the Irish Internet Safety Awareness Centre. We promote a safer, better internet among children and young people. We're funded through the Department of Education, and we work very closely with our Safer Internet Centre partners, ISPCC, National Parents Council and Hotline.ie, and very much our work aligns to the Better Internet for Kids strategies. So we develop education resources to support teachers to integrate online safety and digital citizenship. We have online courses for teachers. We have advice and support for parents, and we are supported by a youth advisory panel who you've heard from three of them who spoke so well today, and I can't take any credit for either. That was all them. So one of the new things we are working at the minute is a new digital citizenship education programme for 5th and 6th class pupils. So that's currently in design, and we're very much looking forward to publishing and sharing that.
Jane, would you just say a little bit more about the work, you know, that you are doing and the impact that you feel it has? You know, how widespread is it? What's your sense of, you know, people's growing awareness in relation to the web? Or is it more a general awareness? Or where would you see the challenge up ahead?
So I think, and I speak from the education kind of section and teachers and schools, I think schools want to do more. I think it is a challenge for them. I think we're still unfortunately in a place where it's reactive. It's reacting to incidents that have happened because, you know, teachers and schools don't feel equipped to deal with. These are some really tricky and sensitive and uncomfortable topics. You know, they don't feel that they have the confidence or are getting access to enough training. They want more time and space to look at these topics, you know, and there's curriculum overload as well. We are trying to build more capacity, build more confidence. You know, we just wrapped up on a training program with 80 primary educators who are, you know, come from across Ireland. We've trained them up to become digital citizen champions so that they can share the knowledge and build the knowledge and build capacity in their own communities. So they got 4 full days of training, which is amazing to get. And, you know, that covered the whole spectrum of digital citizenship, which, you know, is a much broader lens to look at things than online safety, which is risk-focused, it's narrow. You know, this looks at children's rights online, well-being, consumer awareness, you know, respectful online communication. So they looked at all of these topics. You know, they were given the understanding, the knowledge, and then the skills to kind of share this knowledge in their own schools and in their own regions and communities as well. So that is something, you know, we've been really happy that we're helping build capacity there, and it was supported by the Department of Education.
Final sort of question on this piece. In terms of national policy and Department of Education, how consistent is the standard and the opportunity to discuss these areas in education settings across the country?
So I think there is an increased focus on online safety and supporting schools and supporting teachers. I think we've seen more of an appetite from the department to do more and recognising that this is a really, really important area. For example, providing additional funding for teachers. They've also provided us with additional funding to run awareness campaigns for parents. So we just wrapped up a media awareness campaign for parents and educators, and that will run again in September as well. And they've provided funding for that in previous years as well. So I do think there is an appetite to do more and a willingness to do more as well.
Excellent. Áine, you're CEO of the National Parents Council. Maybe put what we've been discussing here into the broader context of parents' role in the education system and how parents are being supported or not supported, or the challenges in this area, and are there positive things you're seeing?
Yeah, so I might just outline what we do in the area first, and then I can maybe go into some of those specific pieces. So internet safety is one aspect of the National Parents Council work. We do a broad range of work with parents. We provide services, and we also are the representative voice of parents in education. So I think that's really helpful to us, because when you start to talk about children's safety online, we really need to see it in a broader context, as you've pointed out there, because parents can often see risk online and not see it in the broader context of society and the society that young people are existing in. So when we talk about pornography, for instance, and I know the previous panel was talking about that, if that's just seen as an issue that's an online issue, that can be very difficult to address, because that whole pornography issue, as it's been explored in the previous panel, is very linked to what's happening in society at a broader level. So, you know, the sexualization of younger girls, all of these kind of things are in the context of what young boys are then accessing online. And I suppose it's really important that for parents, they're not just looking at one aspect of their young person's lives, they're looking at many aspects of their young person's life and how they intersect and interact. So I think from the National Parents Council, the fact that we do supports for parents around SBHE in schools, and we're having those conversations with parents, and it's not just about online activity, it's about how they're experiencing their whole lives. And also we're talking about young people's stresses in life, because often we see online activity, and there's quite a bit of evidence coming through now that a lot of the online activity that children can take part in can be as in a reaction to stress in other areas of their lives. So, and particularly risk activity online can be in a reaction to stress in other. So I think we're in a really good place to join those dots for parents and create supports. So some of the supports we do through the Safer Internet Centre would be, we have a helpline for parents so they can contact us if they have concerns. We do training events for parents, both in person and online. And part of that training now has developed into doing an online agreement with children. So how parents go about that. We'd always in the past kind of suggested that they do these agreements and left parents to do it and said there's lots of resources online. And then when we started looking at the online resources, we could see why parents were struggling. They were very prescriptive often. They didn't really give direction to parents, which is the key to an online agreement, is having a conversation and how to have that conversation and how to listen to your young person and what they enjoy doing online. And I think really specifically, and I think this crosses something of what Jane's saying, and I think the conversations this morning, is what they see as the risks online, because often parents are kind of navigating risks that the young people are not navigating themselves or don't see as risk, because they go, well, I know about that and I avoid it, so don't keep going on to me about it. So listening to a young person and hearing them experience, what they're experiencing as challenging from a parent can be really eye-opening. So I think developing those agreements between a parent and a young person, sitting down and really listening to what they're doing online, really understanding, they're the kind of building blocks that then when something goes wrong, the young person go back to their parent and talk about it, because the conversations have started, and they've started in an understanding way rather than a telling way from a parent. So I think we really need to support parents better. I mean, parents are still the biggest influence on children and young people. And yet I think as a society, what we try and do is put funding and supports into areas we can control and evaluate, which are systems like schools and HSE and TUSLA and all of these excellent people that are doing things. But if you take the point that parents are the biggest influencers on their children's lives, and we tend not to put as much resource into it because we can't control what happens to that resource in the same way, and we can't measure the impact in the same way. And all of our systems are built to show impact. So they're often the least resourced. And I think we really do need to work between that parent-child relationship, developing that from very early on. I think we need to create a language of acceptance around the internet and positivity around the internet with children at a very young age with their parents. So those relationships are developed very well. But that the internet is placed within the offline world as well, that they're not two separate things, because they're not for children. They interact all the time. And I think we as adults need to get around that and start talking about them in a joined up way, about the risks in the real world and the online world. And just one final bit that I suppose is a hobby horse of ours is that we've often talked to young people in developing our services, and time and time again, I always ask young people, if you came across something that you were concerned about in the offline world, would you tell your parents or a teacher? And generally speaking, teenagers would say yes to that question. If you came across something that concerned you in the online world, would you tell your parents or a teacher? They generally say no. We need to get to the bottom of what is going on there, because that's the time where we know particularly vulnerable children that don't seek assistance in those instances are the ones that we are all so fearful of in terms of the response for them. So I think probably I've gone on long enough there.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm wondering, what's your own explanation for why kids might tell you, what's offline but not what's online? What do you think has happened in that space that has led us to that point?
Yeah, well, when I've asked young, because I always follow up with that question, and often they can't really articulate it clearly, but there is something about an embarrassment on it. How have I let this happen to myself? Because it's something that they've been lectured on through their teachers, and conversations around the internet are generally about don't,
Yes.
avoid. A parent walks into a room and the child's on the phone and immediately it's attention. Nothing has to be said, it's attention, because that's the way we respond to online worlds. Whereas those kind of responses aren't in the real world. And actually, we're often much more accepting of where children make mistakes in the real world. You know, it can happen to anybody. What do you need? Whereas the online world, it almost immediately becomes like, well, I've told you not to go on to that, and, you know, what were you doing there, doing that anyway? And I think that's just because I don't think that's, I'm certainly not blaming parents for that. I think that's the conversation we create around the internet and young people, and we really have to change those conversations if we want to have really meaningful, protective conversations with children and young people in their lives.
It's a very worrying point, isn't it? I'm sure some of you will want to ask questions about it, because you know, we've been told and we know how very useful, you know, the internet is, new technology and so on. But if children are, you know, in that place that you're talking about, now I suppose it's mostly if they're involved in embarrassing situations. I'm wondering if it's about other people, would they tell their parents?
You see, I don't think it's about them being in embarrassing situations. I think they feel that it's their fault that something's happened to them.
That's kind of what I meant. Yeah.
And, I mean, what we'd always do is go back to the evidence piece, and I don't think enough research has been done in this area. We know there's an issue. There's an issue, but what we finish up doing is then keep trying to be reactive to the issue. So we've been reactive. We've done the online agreement, and we're trying to promote it, and we think that will help, but we haven't got any evidence that that's what's needed. So I think we really need to start looking for some evidence about the relationship between children's activity and coming into difficult situations on the internet and how they deal with that. We do know that they probably talk to peers in these situations, but we also know that they generally don't. And there has been some research that shows that they're not reporting it to their parents, but we just don't know why. So and I think we need to follow
more research
up with that.
is
Yeah,
needed.
I think so.
And just another question to you about agreements. Like, how many parents do you think, have you any thoughts on how easily parents are taking to having an agreement with their child about internet usage? Is this, I mean, I've talked to a few young parents in the last few days, and interesting, one said to me, I just keep my kids away from it completely. Another said, I give 15 minutes, which is very disciplined. She's actually worked with a tech company, and she's really strict with her parents. And then probably everybody else is a bit in between, you know. I'm wondering, is it something that just happens? I have 2 grandchildren, 3 and 5. And you see the familiarity with the, you know, watching the cartoons or whatever it is. I'm just wondering, do parents just sort of fall into a way of behaving around, you know, technology? And then by the time maybe they're teenagers, it's harder to interrupt or deal with or whatever.
I think that does happen, and I think that's something we do have to change, mainly because the conversation is more important than the agreement, I would say.
Yes.
Starting those conversations. But it's also particularly difficult, I think, for parents when there's more than one child. So there's younger children and there's older children with devices and things like that. But it's also our understanding as well, because I don't know, trying not to give my age away now after being with the National Parents Council for 17 years and lots of other things, but when I was a child, I'd have a radio for listening to music, I'd have a cassette player, I'd have a TV, and I'd have a book. That's all on one device now. So every time a child has a device in their hand, they feel guilty if there's a parent in the room, you know, but they could be doing any one of those activities. So sometimes the sense of I'm on my phone too much. I mean, I don't know whether other people here, you get the record every week of how many hours you've spent online, average per day. And I remember a few months ago being absolutely hard. I think 7 hours and something that week was my average a day. Oh, how have I done that? I know I scroll a bit and I'm a bit guilty of that, but 7 hours, I nearly need to be my wake. And I realised I was using sat-nav on my phone every day because I was travelling to Cork and Sligo and places like that. Yeah. So that was all recording. And it just reinforces to you all the time. You use your device for so many different things, and we get very hung up on time limits. And that creates an argument between parents and children. But I think, one, the conversation is just vital. But 2, any agreement has to have clauses. So, for instance, you've got your average time a day that you should be spending, and it's 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, and it's been pouring all day, and the child is going, but what else can I do? I've used up all my time. You have to have clauses in your agreement for those situations, because if on those situations, which can arise quite regularly, you as a parent are throwing the agreement out the window, it becomes very difficult then to continue. So the training we would do would be a lot of conversations around those situations and how to manage them and still continue to kind of keep the conversations going.
I guess your contribution here today really brings home how much all of this is kind of, what's the word, interceded by, relationships within families, parenting.
Which parents have been doing for as long as children have been born. So a lot of parents have these skills. It's about how to apply them then to these areas.
Let me move on to Julie, Children's Rights Alliance, looking to the future, Julie, and the hope that you would have in terms of the solutions that come out from today. What way are you thinking? Sure, you had ideas before you came in. Anything sort of new that's come up from today that strikes you about the kind of way we need to think about the solutions?
Yeah, well, I think, when it comes to solutions, I think I was actually really struck by what Áine was saying there around where parents are coming from, because I think a lot of us come from a place of fear. I mean, when I was young, we'd the computer sitting in the family room. My mother could take the phone off the hook and you couldn't go online. And that was it. And look how far it's come where we use our devices, you say, Áine, for everything. But I do think, for me, the real thing that strikes me is the power of children and young people in all of this. And the passion and the solutions they bring. And the fact that we need to empower them, actually, to deliver those solutions, to deliver the realities to people of what's happening online, like we heard earlier on, but also to work with them to see them come to fruition in our laws, in our policies, and in our services. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has a fantastic general comment, and it was developed with children and young people all over the world. And what they did with that was amazing consultation, looking at what practically can states do, can businesses do, and can wider society do on the online space to make sure children's rights are upheld. And all of the big solutions out of that came from the young people themselves. So for me, the hope really comes from listening to the experts when it comes to online safety, which are actually the young people. You heard earlier on, they're seeing things that we didn't even think of. And I was talking to them on Monday in their prep session, and they were saying things I'd never even thought about, and dangers I'd never even considered online. So it is really fascinating when we actually sit down and listen and take what they have to say. But I do think, Francis, what you were saying at the outset about all the different opportunities in legislation and all the different opportunities at a European level, at a national level, we're at a time where we can really make a difference. And having so many different voices, parents, groups working with children and young people, lawyers, the Garda, everyone at the table, we can find the solutions that are there. And the thing is, we actually know what a lot of them are. And it's about us making sure that the tech companies are mandated to bring these into place. And it's not just about reaction. We need to be thinking more proactively. So concepts like safety by design, designing every product, every platform, every website with safety as the first concept is how you ensure that children's rights are embedded on the online world. And it's not an easy thing to do. It is an uphill battle. But the more people that recognise that actually it's a benefit to everyone, including the platforms themselves, to start with designing things to be safe for children and young people, that is how we prevent some of the harms. So I think there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things we can do. We can look at a proactive response like that, or we can look at a response around complaints, which is when things, after retrospective, when things have happened, how we can learn from those. But we are at a point in time where there is so much possibility. There is so much we can do. Who would have thought, going back 4 years ago, we would have an online safety commissioner in Ireland that is tasked with actually protecting children and young people? That was a pipe dream. And here we are with one in place. So the time is now really to come together. And I think once we put children and young people themselves and their voice at the heart and focus on laws, policies and services, that is how we can manage to actually make that change.
I mean, that's a really powerful statement you've made about consulting with children, working with children, children's voices. And I mean, it reminds me of what's in the Constitution now since the children's referendum. I mean, it is about children's voices. It's about the right to be consulted. It's about children having rights in their own their own, for themselves, not just within a family setting. And it strikes me that that's really, and I think one of the key messages from today is about, that being a priority area going forward. And that will inform that it's child-proofing again, isn't it? I mean, we've had the whole concept of equality proofing, and I think what we've learned from that is not enough to have the concept, you have to look at the implementation. What does it actually mean? So if you are coming towards this, which we all would be with a children's rights perspective, what does that actually mean? What are you saying to the tech companies about that children's rights perspective? What do they need to do that they're not doing at the moment? I think there's a lot of answers to that, but you might just address that, Julia.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up proofing, actually, because one of the key things that we can do is look at, and I know Noeline would have mentioned it earlier, child rights impact assessments. And what that does is it makes sure that either the company themselves is mandated to actually carry out an assessment of any action they're going to take and the impacts that will have on children's rights. And we in Ireland actually have the opportunity to be leaders on it. The Department of Children, Equality and Disability, trying to make sure I get the right way in which they're going this time, they actually have a commitment within the Children's Policy Framework, Young Ireland, to roll out child rights impact assessments. And we've recently completed a piece of work with them in terms of how you would do that on a national level. But one of the areas they could really look to is to mandating that tech companies have to do that when they're introducing a new product. It's not a new concept. It's tried, it's tested, and what it does is it gives you a sense of what changes need to be made in, say, for example, delivery of a new app to make sure that children's rights are at the heart. That is a big thing that if we brought that in, it would actually show us what the gaps are in anything that they're doing. The other thing is, as well, is that Ireland can also be a leader when it comes to listening to the voice of children and young people. Our Comisiún Man has a youth panel. They've promised they'll extend it to children and young people under the age of 18. You were outlining all the difficulties at Europe at the minute. There's no one listening to children and young people at a European level. So we need to think about how we can bring those voices in and some of those concepts, like a child rights impact assessment, like safety by design, into the European side. But Ireland has an opportunity really to play that leading role, and we have the expertise, we have the commitment, and there is a commitment within government to really roll out these processes. So we need to make sure that we can leverage that when it comes to protecting children.
Let me ask you, Julia, is it in law anywhere at the moment that the tech companies have to consult with children?
No, it is not. And that is something that the Online Safety Commissioner could consider in their next piece of regulation, because at the moment they themselves are showing best practice.
Okay.
And it is something that can happen.
Is it in law anywhere that they have to child-proof their policies?
No. And again, these are the gaps that these online safety codes at the moment are showing us, that there are significant gaps. And we know that the Online Safety Commissioner here in Ireland was actually quite proactive in wanting to address some of them, but they were shot down at a European level. So there is something that we need to look at on the influence Europe is having on our ability to actually close off some of these gaps.
But sometimes if you can start with national legislation, then that begins to impact on European legislation. It can work that way as well, not just European back to national.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a circular piece that goes on. So that could be really something, I think, for the Children's Rights Alliance to target maybe and to monitor with your monitor over the next period.
Definitely.
Because that could be something that you could build into legislation here. And then, I mean, it'd be hugely resisted probably, but then children's rights always are. So, but there might also be more potential to do it in Ireland than in many other places. So it's an interesting, how do you really build in the children's rights perspective? Where do you begin and where are the opportunities now? Both, there's a practice issue, but there's also a legislative issue, I think, which could be quite, given that we have it in the Constitution, it shouldn't be as hard to do it here as in some other places. But that's just a bit of a hobby horse of mine, so I think it'd be an interesting one to look to the future on. Thank you, Julie. Let me move on to Cathy, and you were at the very tough end of the investigation of these crimes. I think on Garda Síochána has you've really developed a lot of expertise in this area. What's your response to the discussion so far, Cathy, on this panel and earlier?
I think from a lot of what I've heard today, I might start looking at my CV, because if all these brilliant ideas are put into place, I might have to look for a new job. And I would love to not have to work in this area, that if it was no longer a problem. I suppose just to touch on what we are seeing, a lot of material that's self-generated by kids from a very young age. And it's very clear from these videos that they have no supervision from parents. They're in rooms on their own, recording and uploading this material. So that's what the first problem that we identify is a lack of awareness by parents of what their kids are doing online. And as Mick Moran often says, if your kid has access to the internet has access to your kids. So as another campaign says, same rules should apply online. We need to look after the kids. We need to be aware of what they're doing. But we also need to have very open-ended conversations with them about what they're doing online. I think, Áine, just maybe to touch on why kids aren't talking about what's happening online. Maybe there is that fear that the device is going to be taken off them, or that they're going to be limited to certain apps or certain platforms. I think if in the contract, if that is a part of the conversation where it's not a punishment, that you're encouraging your kids to come and talk to you about what they're experiencing and what they're seeing, but what they're not comfortable with, it is going and reassuring them that the punishment, there's not going to be a punishment of taking the device off them. I think that's a very important piece. When the referrals come to my door, it's too late. There's already a child been harmed multiple times. As the Minister mentioned first thing this morning, like, we're getting a huge number of referrals from NECMEC, and NECMEC isn't our only source of referrals. We get them from hotline.ie, we get them from a lot of other police forces around the world. They come in through Europol and Interpol. So we are very busy, and we are seeing exactly what kids are doing online. We also see the ease with which they can be accessed by perpetrators. Scams that are used to sexually exploit kids and then blackmail them for financial gain. And that is a lot of what the scams are based on, is for financial gain. It's rare that perpetrators who have an interest in children look for money. It's usually more material that they are looking for. So I think a lot of great ideas spoken about today. Access to apps, age-appropriate content for the kids that are accessing those apps. It's all things that it's in the hand of the tech giants, really, and we need to put more pressure on them. Voluntary is no good. It has to be mandatory.
The children you're seeing and the families you're seeing, tell me about the vulnerability of those children and families. Do you think there's, I mean, sort of naive question in a way, but do you think the vulnerabilities that, are really showing through in this area when a family, say, are more vulnerable or the child is more vulnerable, or would you say it's much more widespread than confined to, particular vulnerabilities?
It's very widespread. And there's a misconception sometimes that it's just young girls. It's not. It's boys as well. It's all ages, and it's every class. Because when we're sending out the referrals to different parts of the country, it's not just the lower class or the middle class. It affects everybody. And we're all busy. And I think sometimes handing a device to a child, we're unaware of the harms that they can become involved in online. And I often wonder how a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old learns the behaviour that they're posting online. Like, it's obviously from influencers, it's from videos and images or movies that they're watching and they're mimicking. So it's...
Did you say 4 or 5?
Yes. Yes, we have identified kids as young as that age who have uploaded content themselves. And usually these accounts are set up on a parent's email, parent's account. And thankfully, it's usually easier for us to identify the kids, and we can intervene quite quickly. And our office takes a dual approach to referrals. I'm very passionate about victim identification. So when we get referrals in of self-generated material, our primary goal is to identify that child, send a referral to our local Divisional Protective Service Unit, do a joint approach with TUSLA, ensure that there is no exploitation involved, and do a safety intervention with the parents and the guardians and educate them about online safety. And we're hoping by doing that we prevent further harm to that child or any child in that family. Obviously then our priority in relation to suspects is identifying them and sending out the referrals or the reports for investigations locally. We've huge challenges with technology ever evolving, VPNs, anonymizing technology, and platform hopping is a big thing for us as well. So even when we do identify a suspect and we have a house search, we've multiple devices with terabytes of data. So then you have your issue of data overload. And then we successfully identify numerous victims around the world. Our investigation escalates and it becomes cross-border investigation, multi-jurisdiction. And then you're into your legislation from, say, we'll take the US, for example, your mutual assistance treaty. Sometimes getting information from platforms in America can be very laborious. There's a lot of hoops we have to jump through, and yeah, it can be challenging for us in so many ways. And then there's our investigators. This is a bespoke area, and it takes us a lot of time to get up to a high skill level, and we're constantly evolving with the training. But then there's burnout. I mean, if you're exposed to that material every day, you have to have a tenure in this area. It does take its toll on members. It takes its toll on everybody who's exposed to it. And obviously we have to look after our people there as well. And when they need to get out, they move on to something else. But you're losing huge experience then as well in that area. And building up those skills, it takes time.
I can imagine the support systems for your staff, for the people investigating, is so important in every area of this work, actually.
No, it is. And in fairness, we do have an excellent support system within the Divisional Protective Services Bureau, within the National Bureau, and we've widened it out now to other sections as well, scenes of crime and technical bureau and stuff. So it is there when we need it.
Well done on all the work you're doing. I wanted to ask you about the preventative work that you're doing, where you're getting an indication something's up. It doesn't seem to be a kind of, well, how is that going?
A lot of the time, parents are shocked when the guards call to the door, and obviously we don't show them the videos. We will often have a conversation with them and explain what has occurred in the video. In some scenarios, there could be 2 or 3 kids in a room. They may not be from the same family, so we're trying to identify everybody involved. It's always a difficult conversation for parents, but we're hoping that when we walk out the door, that's the last time we'll be in that house for that reason. It's not always the case. Sometimes we're sending referrals back to the same address or back to the same station for that address again. But a lot of the time it does work. These parents appreciate the online safety advice they're given. They take a good approach to being more involved. We give them the advice to check out webwise.ie, the different resources that are available there for parents in educating themselves. I've a few people in the room here who often come to me to do talks, and there's nothing I like more than going to parents and teachers and talking about what I'm seeing. And sometimes it's shocking for them, but sometimes it is the effect that you need for them to go home and have a conversation with their kids, and that can be often very beneficial as well.
One last question to you. Tell me what you've learned about perpetrators.
They don't all fit in the same box or in individual boxes, and they certainly don't stay there. There's often a misconception that perpetrators who possess CSAM do not engage in hands-on abuse, and I think it's like you can bring it back to use of drugs. There's always an escalation. You get bored with one type of drug, or it's no longer does it for you, and you move on to the next level. And I think that's something we need to recognise here in Ireland. We have wonderful legislation, we have the relevant penalties, and we need to start imposing them a little bit more. I was very interested to hear Julie talk earlier. intervention, it has to be there for perpetrators. We can't just lock them up and throw away the key. There has to be help there. The first time they come to our attention, we need to be able to divert them somewhere. We need to be able to give them help. Julie also mentioned about the families of perpetrators. Like, I have been there, going in the door where you know you're blowing up that family home. Like, there's young kids there, the wife is there, partner is there, and you have just thrown a hand grenade in the door, and you're walking away from that. And we always give them advice and advise them the supports that are there for the family and the perpetrator. And I think that's something we have worked on the last number of years, that as well as dealing with the victims, there is victims in the perpetrator's family as well, and we have to acknowledge them, and we have to recognise them, and we have to advise them of the resources that are there. They're not always as available as we would like to, but at least if we send them in, signpost them, and if they reach out, hopefully somebody's there to assist them.
That's certainly a message that has come across this afternoon, I think, about the two sides and the different responses that are needed. I want to go back and ask the panel about how much do you think that people's awareness of the harm that can be done online, well, let's say to children particularly, what do you think about the level of awareness in our society at the moment in relation to that? Just want a quick answer from all of you, and I go then to take questions from everybody here. Quick response to that.
Sorry, first of all, could I just maybe speak to the Europe, the Commission, listening to children, if I can maybe kind of help shed a bit more light on what's happening there. They do have avenues to listen and involve children, and they lean on the Safer Internet Centres actually a lot for that. So Pillar 3 of the Better Internet for Kids strategy is all about youth participation. So I might just highlight some of the things we've been involved in terms of consultation and meaningful consultation. We done run recently with our youth panel on the Better Internet for Kids Plus strategy, a review of that with our youth panel and ISPCC, who also have developed a fabulous channel for listening to the under 12s as well. Were involved in that consultation, and David Darcy mentioned that cyberbullying is one of the key priorities for the Commission this year, and our youth panel have been involved in giving their views for that, alongside, I know they were involved in an event recently with Commissioner Mann, who were also there on Article 28 on the protection of minors. I escorted one of our youth panel members to an event in September to give their views alongside their peers for there's a youth advisory panel called the Better Internet for Kids Youth Advisory Panel that has representation from across Europe. So there's a couple of the Irish members there, and that work will continue. And it's not just youth panels, they're also reaching out to try and get the views from vulnerable groups as well, and reaching out beyond the Safer Internet Centres. So I do think there is good work being done there. In terms of, in relation to the harms and the awareness, I'm not sure we're aware of the right harms and the right risks. I think we're seeing lots of knee-jerk reactions and things that aren't based on evidence or what's really going on. I think key point in case Adolescence television show, which has really caused a huge panic and concern among parents. You know, not just in Ireland, we've had a meeting with our European colleagues about this and the concerns, and what we found really concerning about that is, you know, politicians and, you know, making decisions to encourage schools to show this TV show to every school in the UK and making it available with, you know, without proper evidence or supports for teachers. I'm not sure if they're the right messages. And, you know, these kind of moves for overly simplistic responses as well at the minute, you know, banning under 16s from social media, but without the evidence, or where's the evidence that this is the best practice, or, you know, these are kind of short-termist solutions, you know, whereas and I'll just finish up on one last point, but you know, we have a lack of longitudinal evidence and studies in Ireland on, you know, the harms for children online. The last robust piece of research we had was the NACOS survey in 2021, which was part of the EU Kids Online. I am glad to hear that Commissioner Mann are investing in this, and EU Kids Online will take place this year, so we will have an updated version. But it's really important that that investment continues.
I mean, you've made the point a number of times about research, and I think that's something for the Monitor to really look at in the time ahead as well, and asking various bodies, groups, government, whatever, you know, to do more and more specific pieces of research.
Yeah.
That seems to be, you know, a gap. And I suppose the other word we have to use, I mean, there's no proportionality when it comes to having to deal with, if you like, child sexual abuse online. But in terms of, you know, we do need to get a grasp on the proportionality in relation to all of this in terms of use of the internet. And I think that's a very important point as well. And you're kind of making that point there to sort of avoid knee-jerk reactions to say, you know, show everybody, you know, the recent program or whatever. Áine, your sense of this kind of awareness and maybe even proportionality around it. There's no, as I say, there's no proportionality if you're the child at risk or whatever, but just in terms of overall awareness, how do we work that one out?
Well, I mean, I'd very much endorse everything Jane said. I think one of I think the reaction to adolescence, for instance, and I think that's just been like taken us all by surprise, that the shock and reaction to what is essentially a drama that's funded
60 million views.
This drama that's funded to entertain, I say, in, you know, inverted commas, that would have such an impact. And I think those kind of programs are really important that they happen. Like, I'm not completely dismissing it. I think they're great opportunities for parents to have conversations with their children and young people, particularly if it's age appropriate, obviously, but particularly in the fact that the parent can come at it from the, I don't really understand what they were talking about in that, do you? So it gives great opportunities for that. I think the proportionality is really important, because I think that's where parents are left in the middle of this. Are they aware of the concerns and risks? They're aware of everything, and it's nearly paralysing. So there's so much in the media about it. It has taken over from risk, talking about risk in the offline world, which I am always really concerned about. I mean, still we know that bullying incidences happen more in person than they do online, or often the online pieces are connected with an in-person piece, and they've gone to the back of our mind because there's so much talk about the online. And I think when parents are overwhelmed with messages of risk, they go one of two ways, and this is the risk that we're at with overwhelming these messages of harm, is the fact that they either give up, and you have 4- and 5-year-olds uploading information because parents just feel there is nothing that they can do, and it's gone beyond their control, or they take the knee-jerk reactions of, that's it, the phone is gone. And both are extremely risky for the child involved in that scenario, but both is completely understandable from the parental point of view, because they feel so disempowered. The messages are so much that it's out of control, they no longer know how to manage it. So I think they're very, very aware of real risk and maybe some perceived risks as well.
Okay, Áine. Julia?
Yeah, I'm kind of, what's coming to mind for me is the phrase, hard cases make bad law. And people are hearing the worst of the worst, and they're focusing in on that heightened risk, and often, like what you said, Áine, forgetting what is actually happening sometimes, because you just can't deal with all of it, and actually losing hope. I mean, I do think we forget, you know, when it came to, you know, child sexual abuse in person, for want of a better turn of phrase, it was always stranger danger, but actually most of it happens with people that you know and trust. So again, we kind of sensationalize the really hard, shocking cases we hear in the media, and I think often people can sometimes forget the risk of the day-to-day as well. So I do think there's just so much, it's really hard to get your head around it, that actually you just try to focus in on one thing and you may forget the others, or just switch off.
I'm tempted to ask you, what do you think is the answer to that? But it's very, it's a big question.
It's a very big question, and I think, I think Jane and Áine have both kind of spoke about it as well, in that trying to make sure that we think proportionately, as you said about it, that we actually get the evidence out there, because I think you hear, this has happened, this is shocking, and everyone thinks this must be happening to everyone, when actually that could just be one case.
I mean, the danger, as you say, is the overreaction from parents who are so get terrified almost, or
And the media.
As Áine said, they go one way or the other. Yeah. Áine, did you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, I think politicians have a huge responsibility in this. It cannot be a political issue. Children's safety in any context can't be a political issue. But it also can't be on the internet. And sometimes headline statements around safety that's not evidence-based, we have to make sure that commentary that is coming from respected people in our communities is based in evidence. And
what you need there is very well-informed politicians on it.
Yes,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
the reality. And again, I think that, I remember when you often hear this statement, that when you're say in an NGO, you think all of the power is you might think, although I don't think current NGOs think this, but we used to say, I think a lot of the power is in the political system. And as soon as you go into the political system, you think all the power is outside. And you're listening to the NGOs in Morning Ireland saying, you've got all the power, Noeline, not the politicians. So, I mean, it's obviously a mix. You obviously have to kind of have partnerships and work together. But I think, I think for the CRA, having a very clear list of kind of demands for politicians is going to be really important. Cathy, quick comment on this point about kind of awareness and where we need to go. And then I really want to go, I see somebody down there with a hand up already. Let me get an idea if many people want to ask a question. You might, we've 3. All right.
Yeah, I suppose the hopeful thing is we're all talking about this finally, because for a number of years now, those of us who are working in this area, we could only talk about it within that area. Like, nobody wants to talk about this in public. It has been a taboo subject for a long time. People shirk away from it. And it's fantastic to be in a room of people from so many different areas talking about this and looking for solutions. And I think it's only by working together are we going to come up with solutions that is going to change it and hopefully make the internet a safer place for kids going forward. I think even the fact that we're putting pressure on companies, we've seen a change, these teen accounts coming, that is only from pressure from media, from NGOs, and that's the only way we're going to get results, is by working together and putting a bit of pressure on the tech companies.
Well, it's very interesting to hear from you, isn't it, that this wasn't a public conversation before, which is kind of amazing, but it's true and it is now. So that's a very hopeful message.